In 1932, a man sat down and wrote one sentence, just one. Then he closed the notebook, placed it inside a metal box, locked it shut. And for the remaining 32 years of his life, he never, not once, mentioned it again. He had a wife, children, grandchildren. He went to work every morning, came home for dinner every evening. He lived the quiet, ordinary life of an ordinary plumber in Sacramento, California. But he never spoke about what he had seen. He carried it with him until the day he died. His name was Thomas McCarthy. And the sentence he wrote in that notebook was this: "I think I found something they didn't want found. And I think I understand now why they buried it." I've read that sentence dozens of times, and every single time, a different question surfaces. They, who are they? Who holds enough power to decide that something gets buried beneath a city and no one is ever allowed to know? Found. What did he find? What could be so significant that a man would choose silence for 32 years? Never telling his wife, never telling his children, never telling a single soul. And buried, is he speaking metaphorically or literally? And this is the question that kept me up at night. Both. That notebook sat in the attic of an ordinary house in Roseville, California for 80 years. No one read it. No one even knew it existed. Until 2013, when Thomas's great-grandson, a man named David, was clearing out his late grandfather's belongings and found the old metal box sitting among faded family photographs and a yellowed plumbing certificate from 1920. David opened the notebook. Read the first page, then the second, then the third. Then he set it down, stared out the window, and sat there in silence for a very long time. Today we're going to read that notebook together, page by page, day by day. And by the end of this video, when you read that sentence one more time, I want you to ask yourself whether it means something different now. Before we open the notebook, there's something you need to understand about Sacramento. This city has two versions of its history. The version they teach in schools, and the version buried underground. The official version is reasonable, practical, easy to accept. Sacramento in the 1850s was a natural disaster waiting to happen. The city sat at the junction of two major rivers, the Sacramento and the American. Every winter brought flooding. In 1852 alone, the city flooded 6 times. Residents tied boats to their front porches the way people park bicycles by their doors today. Merchants lost inventory. Homes were destroyed. People died. The solution, according to the official story, was simple and sensible: raise the streets. Starting in 1864, the city began hauling in dirt, load by load, wagon by wagon, raising the street level by anywhere from 10 to 15 feet. Buildings whose owners didn't raise them in time found their ground floors suddenly below street level. They became basements, were sealed off, filled in, done. The story ends there. Neat, logical, nothing to question. But there are 3 documents that the official story never mentions. The first. In 1866, the Sacramento Daily Union published a small article, 2 paragraphs. The content: during the raising of K Street, workers had discovered voids beneath the surface, containing structures of unknown origin, predating any known construction in the area. That article appeared once, then nothing. No follow-up, no investigation, no explanation. The entire subject vanished from every newspaper in the city as though it had never been raised at all. The second. In 1868, Sacramento's city engineer wrote a letter to the mayor. That letter still exists in the city's archives. It discusses complications arising from the discovery of pre-existing structures beneath areas currently under construction. His recommendation came down to 4 words: seal and bypass. Do not excavate. No explanation. The mayor approved it immediately. No meeting minutes, no questions asked. No one asked why. The third. Throughout the 1870s, insurance records for several downtown Sacramento properties contain a recurring note. These buildings have sublevels of uncertain origin that are not accessible. Insurance companies charged higher premiums, citing unknown structural liabilities. But no one explained what those lower levels were. No one explained why they couldn't be accessed. And over time, those notations quietly disappeared from the public record. 3 separate documents. 3 separate moments across less than 2 decades where the city of Sacramento touched something beneath the ground and then deliberately chose to look away. Then 64 years passed, and a plumber named Thomas McCarthy went down there. September 14th, 1932. 9:52 in the morning. Thomas McCarthy noted the time the way he always did, the way he had done with every job in his 12 years working for the Sacramento Water Department. The work order was routine: a pipe rupture beneath K Street, between 6th and 7th. His supervisor logged the time he descended through the maintenance access. 9:47 a.m. Thomas McCarthy did not return to the surface for 3 days. But in the worn leather notebook he carried with him, he recorded every hour, every detail he observed, every thought that passed through his mind. 9:52 a.m. he found the broken pipe exactly where the work order said it would be. Minor leak, easy repair. The kind of job he'd done hundreds of times before. But as he was packing up his tools, he heard something. He wrote in the notebook. It sounded like wind moving through a long tunnel. But there is no wind down here. There is never wind down here. McCarthy was not the kind of man who startled easily. 12 years underground had taught him that pipes made all kinds of strange sounds. The groan of water pressure, the tick of metal expanding, the vibration of traffic rolling overhead. But this was different. It was coming from the east, from behind a brick wall. He followed the sound, and he found a section of that wall that had partially collapsed, a gap roughly 3 feet wide. He raised his lantern, looked through, and then he went still. In the notebook, at that exact moment, he wrote just 4 words. Can't believe what I'm seeing. What lay on the other side of that wall was not a pipe chamber, not a crawl space, not a utility void. It was a street, a complete intact street. Buildings lined both sides, wooden awnings still attached overhead, glass windows unbroken. Sidewalks paved with cobblestones laid in a herringbone pattern, the kind of deliberate, skilled craftsmanship that takes time and expertise. McCarthy stepped through the gap in the wall. He walked east, lantern held high, for 30 minutes without stopping, and as he walked, he read the signs above the storefronts lining both sides of the road. Cohen and Sons Dry Goods, Western Telegraph Office, the Golden Eagle Saloon. But the strangest thing wasn't that these buildings existed underground. The strangest thing was their condition. McCarthy had worked in construction before becoming a plumber. He knew what aged timber looked like. He knew what decades of moisture did to glass. He knew what 70 years of darkness and underground air would do to a building. These buildings did not look like that. He wrote, the wooden awnings were barely weathered. They looked as though they had been built last year, not 70 years ago. The glass windows were unbroken, clear enough to see through into the dark interiors. And inside one storefront, the shelves were still fully stocked. Bottles and tins arranged neatly on the shelves, as if the shopkeeper had stepped out for lunch and simply never come back. At one point, McCarthy stopped on the sidewalk and wrote a question in his notebook, not for any future reader, but for himself. He wrote, the air down here should be suffocating. After 70 years sealed underground, there should be nothing breathable left. But I'm breathing fine. The air is circulating from somewhere I cannot see. That question, where is the air coming from inside a space that has been sealed since the 1860s, is one that no historian, no expert, and no city official has ever satisfactorily answered. McCarthy had no way back that first night. He had gone too deep, and his lantern couldn't illuminate enough of the tunnels to find his way out safely in complete darkness. He slept against a locked storefront door on the underground street, his toolbox beside him. On the morning of September 15th, he continued exploring, and he found what he called the Marble Hall. Before I describe what McCarthy wrote, I want you to hold something in mind. Sacramento in the 1850s was a frontier town. Gold had just been discovered in California. People were flooding in from every corner of the world, not to build, but to find their fortune as fast as possible and move on. Houses were thrown up with rough timber. Streets were mud in winter and dust in summer. This was a city struggling to survive, not one building for the ages. Keep that image in mind as you hear what McCarthy found next. The corridor was roughly 20 feet wide enough for 2 horse-drawn wagons to pass side by side, the floor polished marble. Not brick, not stone tile, polished marble. The columns lining both sides, marble as well. Solid, upright, without a crack in sight. The ceiling vaulted perhaps 15 feet overhead with decorative plasterwork running along the arches. McCarthy, a man who had worked in construction before becoming a plumber and knew exactly what he was looking at, stopped and spent nearly an hour in that corridor. He knocked on each column. He crouched down and ran his hand across the floor. He looked up and studied the ceiling. He wrote, this is not painted plaster made to look like stone. This is solid marble. Someone quarried it somewhere, transported it to California, cut it into slabs, polished it, and installed it here, underground, in Sacramento. Then he wrote the line I keep coming back to, the one that, in my opinion, is the most important sentence in the entire 47-page notebook. This doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't work. Unless this wasn't built by the people we think built Sacramento. Unless it was already here. That same afternoon, McCarthy found a staircase. Not going up. Going down. He stood at the top and looked into the darkness below. He was a plumber sent to fix a pipe, not an explorer. He knew he had already gone far beyond what any work order could justify. He went down anyway. The staircase descended roughly 30 feet. The construction material was different from everything above. Not brick, but large stone blocks, precisely cut and fitted tightly together without mortar. At the bottom, McCarthy stepped into something he struggled to name. Not a corridor, not a basement, not a room. A square, an open plaza, expansive, high-ceilinged, with an octagonal fountain at its center, 3 tiers, carved from the same stone as the surrounding buildings, still perfectly intact but long dry. 19 structures rose around the perimeter, standing 2 to 4 stories tall, their windows fitted with ornate iron grillwork and their entrances framed by heavy wooden doors, standing 10 feet high. McCarthy walked the entire perimeter of that underground square. He counted each building. He documented every detail he could make out in the faltering light of his lantern. Then he wrote about something that has stayed with me since the first time I read it. Not what he saw, but what he felt standing there. Not creepy, not haunted, just empty, preserved, like a city frozen in time, waiting for its residents to return. The fountain at the center of the plaza held his attention for a long time. 3 tiers of carved stone, with channels still clearly visible where water had once flowed from one level to the next. Around the base were carved faces, and McCarthy noted this specifically. Faces that did not look European, did not look like the native peoples of the region, but appeared Eastern European, possibly Central Asian. He stood beside that dry fountain for a while, lantern casting long shadows across the stone. Then he kept moving. Later that same morning, McCarthy began noticing inscriptions carved into the facades of the buildings surrounding the plaza. At first, he thought they were decorative. But when he held his lantern closer, he realized they were text. Characters carved deep into the stone, precise and deliberate, placed prominently above entrances and along cornerstones, not hidden in shadows, but positioned exactly where someone passing by was meant to stop and read them. Not English, not Spanish, not any language McCarthy had ever encountered. He copied them carefully, every character, every stroke, into his notebook. 5 distinct inscriptions from 7 different buildings. He had no idea what they said. He simply recorded what he saw. 81 years later, in 2014, when David McCarthy shared photographs of those notebook pages online, a linguist recognized them immediately. Cyrillic script, but not modern Russian. Old Church Slavonic, a liturgical language predating modern Russian by centuries, a language that even many Russian speakers today cannot read. The linguist translated several of the inscriptions. The plaque above the entrance of the largest building, Hall of the Masters. Another building, The Great Work, Preservation of Knowledge. And a third inscription, ending with a date written in a numerical system the linguist said he could not match to any calendar he had ever studied. Take a moment with that. Old Church Slavonic, carved into stone, beneath the streets of Sacramento, California, in buildings that predate the earliest known European settlement of the entire region. How is that possible? These inscriptions weren't hidden. They were displayed prominently on the fronts of buildings, placed exactly where the public was meant to see and read them. Not private symbols, not secret markings. Public declarations, the kind you put on civic buildings when you expect the people walking past to understand what they say. Which means whoever built these structures was part of a community that read Old Church Slavonic. A community with the resources to quarry and transport marble, to construct a plaza with a 3-tiered fountain, to carve precise, detailed inscriptions into stone facades. In Sacramento, California, before 1850, McCarthy also noted a second category of markings on the walls, not writing but geometry. Circles inscribed within squares. Triangles with precise angle measurements noted alongside them. Patterns that he wrote looked less like decoration and more like technical diagrams or possibly astronomical charts. He wrote, too precise to be ornamental. These markings have a purpose. Later that afternoon, McCarthy found an unlocked door in one of the larger buildings and stepped inside. The room contained machinery. He described it the way a man trained in construction and hands-on technical work would describe something completely outside his understanding. A large wheel, nearly 6 feet in diameter, cast from brass or bronze. Along its rim, grooves had been cut at regular, precise intervals. From that large wheel, a descending system of smaller interlocking gears suggested a level of mechanical sophistication that McCarthy found difficult to put into words. And from the central axle of the main wheel, a shaft extended straight down, through the stone floor, and disappeared into whatever lay beneath. McCarthy searched the room for a power source. No steam engine, no water wheel connection, no hand crank or foot pedal, nothing that suggested this machine could be operated by human effort alone. He wrote, "The entire apparatus is clearly designed to be driven by something. I cannot figure out what." Along one wall, wooden shelves stood empty. But McCarthy noticed something. The dust patterns on the shelves and on the floor beneath them told a story. Objects had been stored here, systematically arranged, deliberately organized, and then removed before this space was sealed. Someone had come in here, taken what mattered, and then locked the door behind them on their way out. He also found tools scattered around the room. Not the rough-hand tools of a frontier workshop. Precision measuring instruments, their calibration marks in a system he didn't recognize. An optical lens mounted in a brass housing. Devices whose purpose he could not determine, but whose construction he could assess clearly. He picked one up, felt the weight of it settle in his palm, then set it back down, and wrote, "A level of craftsmanship I have never encountered in any modern tool." By the evening of September 16th, McCarthy had started trying to find his way back. The lantern oil was almost gone. He moved in what he believed was the right direction, then arrived at a dead end, a brick wall. But not old brick, new construction, clearly more recent than anything else he had passed through. He knocked on it. A hollow echo came back from the other side. Someone had sealed this passage deliberately. Recently, he tried another route. A section of collapsed ceiling, broken timber, and rubble blocked the way completely. And then, in the notebook, he wrote about the thing he had been suppressing since the first day. Panic. The lantern nearly out. No certainty about how many more passages might be blocked. No one on the surface who knew where he actually was. In the early hours of September 17th, after a night of moving through near total darkness, McCarthy found a narrow maintenance conduit that connected back into the city's modern water pipe system. He emerged through a maintenance access on the surface, 4 city blocks from where he had originally descended. 6:23 p.m., September 17th. His supervisor logged the time. 3 days after he went down, his supervisor reprimanded him. McCarthy explained that he had become disoriented in the tunnel network while tracking the source of the pipe issue. The official incident report reads as follows. Employee found after being trapped in utility tunnels due to collapsed passage. That is all it says. Nothing about the underground street. Nothing about the marble hall. Nothing about the plaza with the fountain and 19 buildings. Nothing about the Slavonic inscriptions, the brass machinery, or the precision tools that outclassed anything made in 1932. McCarthy filed no supplementary report. He made no request for an investigation. He did not tell his supervisor what had actually happened down there. He went home, cleaned up, sat down to dinner with his family, and said nothing. His son, who spoke with David shortly before his own death in 2014, recalled that Thomas McCarthy would occasionally say, almost to himself, "Sacramento has secrets that the official history leaves out." Just that. Nothing more. No story attached to it. No explanation offered. The family assumed it was the kind of vague, wistful thing an old man says. No one ever pressed him on it. And the leather notebook sat in the metal box, in the attic, through the remaining 32 years of Thomas McCarthy's life. Through 20 years after his death, passed along through the family without anyone knowing what it contained until David opened it in 2013. I've thought a great deal about what those 32 years must have been like for Thomas McCarthy. Going to work each day, walking the streets of Sacramento, perhaps passing the very maintenance access he had descended through on the morning of September 14th, 1932, knowing what lay beneath the streets he was walking on, knowing what was sitting 40 feet below the buildings he passed every day, and choosing every single day to say nothing. Why? Maybe he feared that no one would believe him. Maybe he sensed consequences he couldn't fully see but could feel hovering at the edges. Maybe he had thought about those newer brick walls deliberately sealing off passageways and understood that someone was still actively working to keep people out. Or maybe he was simply a man with an ordinary job and an ordinary family, and he didn't want the rest of his life torn apart by something he had no idea what to do with. Whatever the reason, he chose silence, but he didn't let what he had seen disappear. He wrote it down, carefully, honestly. 47 pages in pencil, with rough sketches and copied inscriptions and notes about acoustics and air quality, and the weight of a brass tool in his hand, as if he knew that someday someone would read those pages. And he wanted that person to understand exactly what he had witnessed. In 2013, David McCarthy finished reading his great-grandfather's notebook. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't immediately post it online as proof of a grand conspiracy. He started checking. He contacted the Sacramento Public Works Department and asked about maps of the underground areas beneath the city. They sent him schematics of utility tunnels and the sections open to tourists. Nothing matched the scale Thomas had described. He contacted the Sacramento History Museum. They confirmed that portions of the old street level had been preserved underground, and that some of these sections were open to visitors. But they described it as isolated pockets beneath individual buildings, not interconnected passages, not multiple levels, and certainly not 12 connected city blocks. A curator told David directly. Stories about an extensive underground city beneath Sacramento were urban legend. People loved mysterious narratives, but the reality was far more mundane. Some old storefronts got covered when the streets were raised. That was it. David was not satisfied. He went deeper into the historical record, and he found 3 things the museum had never once mentioned to him. The 1866 Sacramento Daily Union article, 2 paragraphs, no follow-up, about structures of unknown origin discovered during the raising of K Street. The 1868 letter from the city engineer to the mayor, recommending that workers seal and bypass what they had found without excavating further. And the 1870s insurance records noting sublevels of uncertain origin beneath multiple downtown properties, inaccessible, unexamined, and eventually erased from the public record. 3 separate documents, 3 separate moments, all pointing at the same thing, and none of them appearing anywhere in the official historical record of Sacramento that David could find. In 2015, David launched a crowdfunding campaign to hire ground-penetrating radar equipment, technology capable of detecting underground voids and structures without any digging at all. The estimated cost was $40,000. The campaign fell short of its goal. That same year, he formally petitioned the Sacramento City Council for permission to conduct a limited survey of the utility tunnels his great-grandfather had described. The request was denied. The official reason: safety concerns and liability issues. The tunnels were deemed structurally unsound and not suitable for access. David pushed back. He asked why, if the tunnels were so dangerous, they had never been properly mapped and secured. He never received a clear answer. Then, in March 2017, a water main broke on K Street, approximately 2 blocks from where Thomas McCarthy had descended in 1932. A repair crew was sent to excavate down to the old pipe system. David heard about it and went to the site. He spoke with one of the workers on the crew, a man who didn't want to give his name. The worker told David that when they dug down, they found what he described as strange brickwork, too fine, too deliberate to be a standard underground utility structure, and a sealed passage that produced a distinct hollow echo when knocked on, suggesting a large open space on the other side. His supervisor told him to ignore it and focus on the pipe. They finished the repair, filled everything back in. No supplementary report was filed. It was the 3rd time in 150 years that the same stretch of K Street had been opened up. Something unexpected had been found, and the decision had been made to cover it back over without further investigation. There is something about Sacramento's official history that has never been satisfactorily explained. The street-raising project began in 1864 and continued for decades. At the time, Sacramento had a population of roughly 13,000 people. It was a young city, financially fragile, administratively thin, still finding its footing. And yet it executed one of the most complex urban infrastructure projects in 19th century North America. The coordination required: excavation, fill material management, structural reinforcement, the handling of hundreds of individual buildings in different states of compliance, demanded a level of engineering knowledge and logistical organization that seems, on examination, surprisingly sophisticated for a city of Sacramento's age and size. And in the middle of all that, the workers swinging those shovels hit something the city engineer decided not to investigate. Seal and bypass. Do not excavate. The Tartaria theory, whether you find it compelling or not, raises a question I think deserves more serious consideration than it typically receives. Not, did a mysterious advanced civilization exist in the ancient past? But rather, If something existed before what we know, and the people who came after it chose not to investigate it, who would ever record that in the history books? The answer is simple: no one. History is written by the people doing the writing. They document what they see, what they understand, and what fits within the boundaries of their worldview. What doesn't fit doesn't get written down, or it gets written down once and then quietly buried, or it gets sealed behind a brick wall and covered with 30 feet of filled dirt. Sacramento is not the only city with a story like this. Seattle raised its streets after the Great Fire of 1889. Beneath downtown Seattle today is a network of old streets and basement levels that locals call Seattle Underground. The official explanation: old street level covered over during post-fire reconstruction. Chicago raised its streets in the 1850s. Official reason: drainage and sanitation improvements. The same pattern repeated across city after city across the United States in the 19th century. A practical problem requiring a practical solution. Streets get raised. Old ground level becomes underground. What was found in the process gets sealed off, filled in, and quietly removed from the record. Maybe that's all it is. Coincidence born of similar practical decisions made in different cities at different times. Maybe it isn't. We began this video with one sentence. Read it again. I think I found something they didn't want found. And I think I understand now why they buried it. The first time you heard those words, you were curious. Now, after everything you've just heard, the question is no longer what did he find. The question is, who are they? The officials who ordered workers to seal and bypass in 1868. The editors who never ran a follow-up to the 1866 article. The supervisor who told his crew to ignore the hollow wall on K Street in 2017. Or is they something larger? A pattern of decisions made across generations, across administrations, across entire eras of history, ensuring that no one ever asks too many questions about what lies beneath the cities we live in. Thomas McCarthy went underground to fix a broken pipe. He found something he had no framework to understand, no language to describe to another person without being dismissed as unhinged, no authority to compel anyone to take seriously. He was a 34-year-old plumber in Sacramento in 1932, so he chose silence. But he did not let what he had seen disappear. He wrote it down, painstakingly, honestly, in 47 pages of pencil-written notes, rough architectural sketches, carefully copied inscriptions, and observations about the weight of a brass tool and the quality of air in a sealed underground space, as if he knew, on some level, that someone would eventually read those pages. And he wanted that person to understand precisely what he had witnessed. The marble hall is still down there. If what McCarthy wrote is true, it lies somewhere beneath K Street, Sacramento, roughly 40 feet below the surface, with its marble columns still standing, its polished floor still intact, and the echo of footsteps still waiting to fill a space no one has been permitted to enter since a plumber stumbled into it on a September morning in 1932. Or none of it exists. Thomas McCarthy was a man who fabricated an extraordinarily detailed story, recorded it in meticulous 47-page detail, locked it in a box, and went to his grave without telling another living soul. You decide which of those is more plausible. As for me, I keep asking, not because I'm certain this story is true, but because the questions it raises deserve better answers than the ones we've been given. Why did the 1866 newspaper article disappear without a follow-up? Why did the city engineer in 1868 order workers to stop digging without explaining what they had found? Why was a crew told to ignore a hollow sealed wall on K Street in 2017 and fill it back in before the end of the workday? And why, when David McCarthy asked for permission to conduct a non-invasive radar survey, something that required no digging, no demolition, no disruption whatsoever, was he turned down without a meaningful explanation? The best question isn't, is this real? The best question is, if it is real, why aren't we allowed to know? And that question doesn't belong only to Sacramento. Where do you live? What is the history beneath your city? Are there documents filed away that no one has thought to ask about? Are there structures that were sealed off and never properly examined? We walk across the same streets every day and never stop to wonder what they were built on top of. We live inside cities and take for granted the version of history we were handed. Thomas McCarthy stopped to wonder. And what he found was something that changed him so profoundly. He spent the